The morning sun painted the Colorado plains in shades of amber and gold, stretching endlessly toward mountains that stood like silent sentinels against the horizon. Rebecca Morrison had always found peace in these early hours when the world belonged only to her and the gentle sounds of awakening wildlife. She guided her horse, Thunder, along the familiar path that bordered Willow Creek, the same route she had traveled every morning for the past 5 years since settling in this remote valley. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1859, and the territory was still wild enough that a woman traveling alone required both courage and skill. Rebecca possessed both in abundance. At 24, she had learned to read the land like others read books, understanding the subtle signs that meant safety or danger, abundance or scarcity. Her auburn hair caught the morning light as it escaped from beneath her worn leather hat, and her green eyes missed nothing as they scanned the terrain ahead. She had come to Colorado Territory with her husband, James, full of dreams about building a ranch that would prosper in this untamed land. Those dreams had died with James 2 winters past, claimed by a fever that no amount of prayer or medicine could break. But Rebecca had stayed. This land held too much of their shared hopes to abandon, and she had discovered reserves of strength she never knew existed. The creek ran swift and clear this morning, swollen by recent rains that had turned the usually docile waterway into something more demanding of respect. Rebecca noted how the current carved new channels through the sandy banks, creating treacherous pools where the unwary might find themselves in serious trouble. She had seen cattle lost to such conditions, pulled down by hidden currents, or trapped in the sucking mud that formed where water met earth in dangerous combinations. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound that made her blood run cold. A horse's scream of terror, high and desperate, carrying across the morning air with the unmistakable note of an animal in mortal danger. Rebecca spurred Thunder toward the sound, her heart pounding as she recognized the particular quality of fear that meant death was only moments away. What she found when she crested the small ridge overlooking a bend in Willow Creek defied every expectation her frontier experience had taught her to form. Below her, perhaps 50 yards from the creek's main channel, a magnificent black stallion struggled frantically in what appeared to be a pool of liquid earth. But it was not the horse alone that commanded her attention. Clinging to the animal's neck, nearly submerged in the treacherous quicksand that had claimed them both, was a man. Not just any man, she realized as her eyes took in details that spoke of wealth and status far beyond anything she had expected to encounter in this remote valley. His clothing, though now stained with mud and water, showed the fine craftsmanship of materials she had only glimpsed in the most prosperous trading posts. Silver ornaments caught the sunlight despite their coating of sand, and even in his desperate situation, he carried himself with a dignity that suggested nobility. Most striking of all were his features. This was clearly a Native American warrior, but his dress and bearing spoke of rank and authority that transcended the simple categories Rebecca had learned to recognize. The decorative elements of his clothing, the quality of his weapons, the sheer magnificence of his horse, all suggested someone of tremendous importance within his tribal structure. The quicksand had claimed them both nearly to the chest level, and Rebecca could see that every movement only drew them deeper into the earth's hungry embrace. The warrior's struggles were growing weaker, his strength clearly failing as the sand and water combination sapped his energy with relentless efficiency. His horse, though still fighting valiantly, was beginning to show signs of the exhaustion that would soon claim them both. Rebecca's mind raced through the options available to her. Riding for help would take hours, and these two would be dead long before assistance could arrive. Attempting a rescue alone meant risking her own life in terrain that had already proven its deadly capabilities. But walking away was simply not an option for someone whose moral compass had been shaped by frontier values that demanded assistance to anyone in mortal danger. Thunder sensed her urgency as Rebecca quickly assessed the tactical situation. The Quicksand pool occupied a natural depression where recent flooding had created the perfect conditions for this treacherous trap. Water from the creek had mixed with fine sand and silt, creating a semi-liquid mass that could support weight initially but gradually drew down anything that remained stationary for more than a few moments. She had encountered similar formations before, though never with human lives hanging in the balance. The key to successful rescue lay in distributing weight across the largest possible surface area while maintaining steady, deliberate movement that avoided the sudden motions that would accelerate the sinking process. Rebecca had rope, but not nearly enough to span the distance from solid ground to the trapped victims. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What she did have was experience with livestock rescue and a thorough understanding of how horses thought and reacted under extreme stress. The stallion's panic was actually working against its survival, as each desperate lunge only drove both horse and rider deeper into the hungry sand. If she could calm the animal, she might be able to coordinate a rescue that saved them both. Rebecca dismounted and began gathering materials that might prove useful. Fallen branches from nearby cottonwood trees could provide flotation and leverage. Her saddle blanket, though precious as one of her few remaining possessions of real quality, could be sacrificed if it meant saving 2 lives. Most importantly, her voice and manner could project the calm confidence that frightened animals desperately needed to follow human guidance. She approached the edge of the quicksand pool with extreme caution, testing each step to ensure that solid ground would support her weight. The closer she came to the trapped pair, the more details she could observe about their desperate situation. The warrior was conscious but clearly weakening rapidly. Blood seeped from a wound on his forehead, suggesting that his fall into this trap had not been a simple accident, but the result of some previous injury or conflict. His eyes, when they met hers across the 20 feet of treacherous ground that separated them, showed intelligence and dignity despite his helpless position. She saw no fear in his gaze, though death was clearly only minutes away. Instead, she read a kind of resigned acceptance that spoke of someone accustomed to facing mortality with courage. But beneath that stoic exterior, she also detected something that might have been surprise at seeing a white woman in this remote location. The horse presented the more immediate challenge. Animals in panic rarely responded to unfamiliar humans, and this magnificent stallion was clearly a warhorse trained for battle rather than cooperation with strangers. But Rebecca had spent years working with difficult animals, and she understood that even the most independent creatures would accept help when their survival instincts overcame their learned behaviors. She began speaking in the low, steady tones that had calmed countless frightened animals over the years. Not words of meaning, but sounds of comfort and reassurance that transcended language barriers. The horse's ears flicked toward her voice, though its struggles continued unabated. The warrior, she noticed, had begun watching her efforts with something that might have been hope mixing with his previous resignation. Rebecca's first priority was stopping the sinking process. As long as the horse continued its frantic movements, both victims would continue their descent towards certain death. She needed to provide something for them to grasp, something that would distribute their weight across a larger surface area and halt their downward progress. The longest cottonwood branch she could find measured perhaps 12 feet, not nearly enough to span the distance from solid ground to the trapped pair. But by lashing several branches together with rope from her saddle, she could create a crude but potentially effective rescue device. The work required precious minutes during which she could hear the horse's breathing becoming more labored and the warrior's struggles growing noticeably weaker. When her improvised rescue pole was complete, Rebecca tested its strength carefully before attempting to extend it toward the quicksand victims. The construction held, though she knew it would not support much weight without breaking. This would be a delicate operation requiring perfect timing and coordination between rescuer and rescued. She managed to work the end of her branch construction to within a few feet of the warrior's outstretched hand. But the gap was still too wide for him to reach without making the kind of sudden movement that would accelerate his sinking. The horse's position made it impossible for the warrior to maneuver closer without risking injury to both himself and his mount. The solution, when it occurred to Rebecca, was so dangerous that she hesitated for several heartbeats before committing to the attempt. She would have to enter the quicksand herself, but in a controlled manner that used her understanding of the medium's properties to avoid becoming trapped with the victims she was trying to save. Rebecca removed her boots and most of her heavier clothing, reducing her weight and eliminating materials that might snag or drag her down. She kept her rope securely tied around her waist and anchored to Thunder, who had been trained to maintain steady tension when working cattle. If her rescue attempt failed, the horse might be able to extract her before the quicksand claimed a third victim. The sensation of entering the quicksand was unlike anything she had experienced before. The mixture of sand and water felt solid, enough to support her weight initially, but she could sense the unstable nature of the surface beneath her feet. Each step required careful consideration and slow, deliberate movement that maintained her balance, while avoiding the rapid motions that would trigger the medium's deadly embrace. Step by agonizing step, Rebecca worked her way closer to the trapped warrior and his horse. The distance was only 15 feet, but crossing it required more courage and skill than anything she had previously attempted. The warrior watched her approach with growing amazement, clearly unable to understand why a stranger would risk her life for someone she had never seen before. When she finally came within reach, Rebecca found herself face to face with eyes that held depths of intelligence and character that challenged every assumption she had formed about the cultural differences between their peoples. This was clearly a man of substance and authority, someone whose life had meaning far beyond his individual survival. But more than that, she saw qualities of courage and nobility that transcended the boundaries of race or culture. The rescue itself required coordination and trust between three beings who had no common language except the shared understanding that cooperation meant survival while failure meant death for all involved. Rebecca positioned herself to provide stability for the warrior, while he worked to calm his horse and prepare for the delicate process of extraction. The horse proved to be the key to their salvation. Once the animal understood that help had arrived and panic would only worsen their situation, its intelligence and training took over. This was clearly a war horse of exceptional quality, bred and trained for situations requiring courage and discipline under extreme stress. When the warrior spoke to his mount in calm, authoritative tones, the animal's struggles ceased almost immediately. Working together, Rebecca and the warrior managed to position the horse so that its powerful legs could find purchase on more solid material beneath the quicksand surface. The extraction process was slow and exhausting, requiring multiple attempts and constant adjustment of their tactics as conditions changed. But gradually, through sheer determination and careful cooperation, they made progress toward the safety of solid ground. The warrior proved to be stronger than his weakened condition had suggested. Once he understood Rebecca's rescue plan, he demonstrated the kind of physical courage and intelligent cooperation that marked him as an exceptional individual. His efforts to assist his own rescue while protecting both his horse and his rescuer showed a nobility of character that impressed Rebecca despite the desperate circumstances. When the horse finally managed to heave itself onto firm ground, the warrior was able to follow, though clearly exhausted by his ordeal. Rebecca, supported by her rope and Thunder's steady strength, completed her own extraction with considerably less difficulty than she had feared. All 3 participants in the rescue collapsed onto safe ground, breathing heavily and covered with the sand and mud that marked their survival of an encounter with death. The immediate danger had passed, but Rebecca quickly realized that new challenges were beginning. The warrior's head wound was more serious than it had appeared from a distance, and his exhaustion went beyond simple fatigue to suggest someone who had been fighting for survival for some time before his encounter with the Quicksand. His magnificent horse, though rescued, was clearly suffering from the effects of its ordeal and would require care before it could travel. More importantly, Rebecca found herself responsible for a man whose identity and importance she could only guess at from the evidence of his appearance and possessions. His clothing and ornaments suggested wealth and status, while his bearing and the quality of his horse indicated someone of considerable importance within his tribal structure. Helping him had been the obvious moral choice, but the consequences of that decision were only beginning to unfold. The warrior himself seemed as uncertain about their situation as Rebecca felt. He studied her with obvious curiosity, clearly trying to understand what had motivated a white woman to risk her life for a stranger. His expression suggested gratitude mixed with confusion, as if her actions had challenged assumptions he held about the nature of relationships between their peoples. Communication proved to be their first challenge. The warriors spoke what Rebecca assumed was Comanche, though her limited exposure to Native American languages left her uncertain about specifics. She tried the few words of Spanish she had learned from Mexican traders, but received no response that suggested comprehension. English seemed equally foreign to him, though she thought she detected signs that he might understand more than he could speak. Eventually, they managed to establish basic communication through gestures and simple demonstrations. Rebecca indicated her intention to help treat his wounds and care for his horse. The warrior seemed to understand and appreciate her offers of assistance, though his acceptance carried a dignity that suggested he was unaccustomed to being dependent on others for help. His head wound required immediate attention to prevent serious infection. Rebecca's frontier experience had taught her basic medical skills out of necessity, and she carried supplies for treating both human and animal injuries. The warrior submitted to her ministrations with stoic patience, though she could see that his pain was considerable. As she cleaned and bandaged his injury, Rebecca found herself studying his features more closely than propriety would normally allow. This was clearly a young man, probably close to her own age, with the kind of strong, intelligent face that suggested both physical courage and mental acuity. His hands, when she examined them for other injuries, showed the calluses of someone skilled with weapons and horses, but also a refinement that spoke of status and privilege. The horse proved to be as magnificent as its appearance had suggested. Though exhausted and mud-covered, the stallion's conformation and bearing marked it as an animal of exceptional quality. Its tack and ornaments, when Rebecca examined them, showed craftsmanship that reinforced her growing conviction that she had rescued someone of tremendous importance within his tribal hierarchy. But perhaps most intriguing were the subtle signs that suggested this warrior's recent experiences had been far from routine. His weapons showed evidence of recent use, and his clothing bore tears and stains that indicated conflict or hard travel. The injury that had apparently led to his fall into the quicksand was consistent with a blow from a weapon rather than an accident, suggesting that his presence in this remote valley might be connected to larger events of which Rebecca was completely unaware. As the day progressed and immediate medical needs were addressed, Rebecca found herself facing decisions that would have far-reaching consequences for both their lives. The warrior was clearly in no condition to travel immediately, and his horse required rest and care before it could safely carry him away from this place. Her cabin was less than an hour's ride from their current location, and it offered the security and supplies necessary for proper recovery. But bringing the Native American warrior to her home, regardless of the circumstances that had brought them together, would create complications that extended far beyond simple hospitality. The territorial authorities maintained uneasy relationships with various tribal groups, and the presence of an armed warrior at her homestead could be interpreted as evidence of collaboration or sympathy that might endanger her own position within the settler community. Yet the alternative of leaving an injured man to fend for himself in hostile territory was equally unacceptable to Rebecca's moral standards. The frontier code that had shaped her values demanded assistance to anyone in genuine need, regardless of their background or the potential consequences of providing help. She had risked her life to save this warrior from the quicksand, and abandoning him now would render that sacrifice meaningless. The warrior himself seemed to understand the complexity of their situation. As his strength returned and the immediate crisis passed, Rebecca noticed him studying their surroundings with the careful attention of someone evaluating tactical possibilities. His eyes missed nothing as they assessed escape routes, defensive positions, and the various advantages or disadvantages their current location might offer. When he looked at her, Rebecca saw a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty that mirrored her own feelings about their situation. He was clearly grateful for her rescue and assistance, but equally aware that their association placed both of them in potentially dangerous circumstances. The frontier was not a place where cultural boundaries could be crossed without consequences, and they both understood that their temporary alliance might create lasting complications. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Rebecca made her decision. Whatever risks were involved in bringing this warrior to her cabin, the moral obligation to provide proper care for his injuries outweighed concerns about political or social complications. She indicated through gestures her intention to take him to her home, and after a moment of obvious consideration, he nodded his acceptance. The journey to Rebecca's cabin required careful planning due to the warrior's weakened condition and his horse's need for frequent rest. They traveled slowly, with Rebecca leading the way along routes that avoided the main trails where they might encounter other settlers or territorial officials. The warrior proved to be an excellent rider despite his injuries, handling his magnificent stallion with skill that impressed Rebecca's experienced eye. Her cabin, when they finally reached it in the early evening light, represented everything she had built during her years alone on the frontier. Small but well constructed, it offered security and comfort that had been earned through hard work and careful planning. The corrals and outbuildings showed evidence of the livestock operation she had developed to support herself, while the vegetable garden and preserved food supplies demonstrated her commitment to long-term survival in this challenging environment. The warrior's reaction to her homestead was subtle but clearly appreciative. Rebecca saw him noting the defensive advantages of the location, the quality of the construction, and the evidence of successful adaptation to frontier life. His expression suggested respect for what she had accomplished, mixed with surprise that a woman alone had achieved so much in such a demanding environment. Settling her unexpected guest required adjustments to routines that had become second nature during her years of solitary life. The warrior needed proper medical attention for his head wound, nutritious food to restore his strength, and secure shelter while he recovered from his ordeal. His horse required feed, grooming, and veterinary care that would restore its magnificent condition. But beyond these immediate needs, Rebecca found herself hosting someone whose very presence transformed her understanding of the world around her. This warrior carried knowledge and perspectives that challenged assumptions she had never questioned, and his responses to her hospitality revealed depths of character that complicated every stereotype she had absorbed about Native American culture. As night fell over the Colorado plains and Rebecca prepared sleeping arrangements for her guest, she realized that the rescue at Willow Creek had initiated changes in her life that would extend far beyond this temporary hospitality. The warrior represented connections to a world she had never imagined, and his obvious importance within his tribal structure suggested that her actions might have consequences reaching far beyond her small cabin. The stars that emerged in the clear mountain air seemed to shine with unusual brightness that first night, as if the universe itself was acknowledging that something significant had begun in this remote valley. Rebecca lay awake long into the night, listening to the sounds of her guests' peaceful breathing and wondering what tomorrow would bring to her suddenly complicated life. Dawn arrived with a chorus of meadowlarks and the gentle sound of wind through the aspen groves that sheltered Rebecca's cabin. She had slept fitfully, her mind churning with questions about the extraordinary circumstances that had brought a Comanche warrior to her doorstep. When she emerged from her small bedroom, she found her guest already awake, sitting quietly beside the window where he could observe the surrounding landscape. The morning light revealed details about his appearance that the previous evening's urgency had obscured. This was unquestionably a man of remarkable bearing and obvious nobility. His features, though marked by exhaustion and the lingering effects of his injury, showed the kind of refined strength that spoke of generations of leadership and privilege. The silver ornaments adorning his clothing were not mere decoration, but symbols of rank and achievement within his tribal hierarchy. Most striking were his eyes, which held depths of intelligence and character that challenged every assumption Rebecca had formed about the differences between their cultures. When he looked at her, she saw not the savage warrior that frontier legends described, but a sophisticated individual whose thoughts and emotions were as complex as any she had encountered in civilized society. He had clearly been examining her cabin's interior while she slept, though not in the manner of someone planning mischief or escape. Rather, his observations seemed driven by genuine curiosity about how a white woman had managed to create such a functional and comfortable home in this challenging environment. She noticed him studying her books, her carefully maintained household implements, and the various tools that marked her as someone skilled in frontier survival. Rebecca's first priority was preparing a substantial breakfast that would help restore her guest's strength after his ordeal. She moved quietly about her kitchen, gathering ingredients for a meal that would demonstrate proper hospitality while accommodating what she assumed might be dietary preferences different from her own. The warrior watched her preparations with obvious interest, though he made no attempt to interfere or suggest alternatives. When she placed the completed meal before him, his response revealed both gratitude and surprise at the quality and abundance of what she offered. He ate with obvious appreciation, though maintaining the dignified manner that seemed to characterize everything about his behavior. Rebecca found herself studying his reactions, trying to understand the cultural context that shaped his responses to her hospitality. Communication remained their primary challenge, though both were making progress in understanding each other through gestures and simple demonstrations. Rebecca pointed to herself and said Rebecca clearly, repeating the name until he nodded understanding. When she indicated that he should provide his own name, his response was both surprising and enlightening. The word he spoke carried multiple syllables and a musical quality that suggested deep cultural significance. But more than that, his manner of pronouncing it conveyed importance that went beyond simple identification. This was clearly not just a personal name, but a title that carried weight and meaning within his tribal structure. Rebecca attempted to repeat what she had heard, and his patient corrections helped her achieve an approximation that seemed to satisfy him. As the morning progressed, Rebecca began to understand that her guest's presence in this remote valley was connected to events far more significant than a simple hunting expedition or routine travel. His weapons, when she examined them more closely, showed evidence of recent and serious combat. His horse's equipment included items that suggested long-distance travel under difficult conditions. Most tellingly, his obvious concern about their security indicated that he might be fleeing from pursuit or danger. The warrior's behavior throughout the morning reinforced Rebecca's growing conviction that she had rescued someone of tremendous importance within Comanche society. He carried himself with natural authority even in his weakened condition, and his responses to her various questions and gestures showed the kind of quick intelligence that marked natural leaders. But beneath his composed exterior, she sensed an urgency that suggested time was a critical factor in whatever situation had brought him to this place. Their breakthrough in communication came when Rebecca brought out maps she used for planning her ranch operations. The warrior's eyes immediately focused on the detailed representations of local terrain, and his obvious familiarity with map reading surprised her with its sophistication. Using the charts as reference points, they began to establish a rudimentary understanding of recent events that had led to their meeting. Through careful pointing and gesture, the warrior indicated that he had been traveling from the north when attacked by what appeared to be a large force of enemies. The engagement had been severe enough to leave him wounded and separated from his companions, forcing him to flee south toward territory he hoped would offer sanctuary. His encounter with the Quicksand had occurred while he was seeking water. For his exhausted horse, his weakened condition making him careless about terrain that he would normally have recognized as dangerous. Rebecca's understanding of regional politics helped her interpret the significance of what she was learning. Tensions between various tribal groups and territorial authorities had been escalating throughout the summer, with reports of conflicts and raids becoming increasingly frequent. If her guest was indeed a leader of significant stature within Comanche society, his presence in this area might be connected to larger events that could affect the entire region, but more immediate concerns demanded attention as well. The warrior's head wound, while not life-threatening, required continued care to prevent infection or complications that could prove serious. Rebecca's frontier medical knowledge was limited but practical, and she set about providing the kind of treatment that had served her well in previous emergencies involving both humans and livestock. Her patients submitted to her ministrations with stoic patience that impressed her with its dignity. Pain was clearly considerable, but he showed no sign of complaint or weakness as she cleaned and redressed his injury. His responses to her medical care revealed both trust in her competence and appreciation for her gentle touch, though he maintained the composed demeanor that seemed to characterize his approach to all situations. The warrior's horse required attention as well, and Rebecca was pleased to discover that her guest possessed veterinary skills that complemented her own knowledge of animal care. Working together, they examined the magnificent stallion thoroughly, treating minor injuries and ensuring that the animal's recovery from its quicksand ordeal was proceeding normally. The horse's obvious affection for its master, combined with its exceptional quality and training, reinforced Rebecca's growing understanding of her guest's high status. As they worked with the horse, Rebecca began to appreciate the sophisticated relationship between warrior and mount that characterized Plains Indian culture. This was far more than simple transportation or even the partnership she had observed between cowboys and their horses. The stallion responded to subtle signals and commands that spoke of years of training and mutual understanding, while the warrior's care for his animal revealed depths of affection and respect that transcended mere utility. The afternoon brought developments that transformed Rebecca's understanding of her situation entirely. While tending to outdoor chores, she noticed dust clouds on the horizon that suggested approaching riders. The warrior, whose recovery had progressed remarkably throughout the day, immediately became alert to potential danger. His assessment of the distant movement was swift and professional, clearly drawing on extensive experience in reading signs of potential threat. What they observed as the riders drew closer was both reassuring and intimidating. This was obviously a Comanche search party, but one whose size and organization suggested they were seeking someone of tremendous importance. Rebecca counted at least 20 mounted warriors, all magnificently equipped and riding horses that spoke of wealth and status within their tribal hierarchy. The precision of their movement and the authority of their leader marked this as no ordinary rescue mission. The warrior's reaction to seeing his approaching kinsman was complex and revealing. Relief was obvious, but it was tempered by concern. that seemed focused on Rebecca's safety rather than his own rescue. He made gestures that she interpreted as warnings about potential danger, though his manner suggested that he was prepared to use his influence to protect her from any hostile intentions his rescuers might harbor. Rebecca's own emotions were equally complicated as she contemplated the approaching confrontation. These warriors represented a world she had never directly encountered, despite years of frontier life in territory where such meetings were always possible. Their reputation for fierceness in battle was legendary, but she was beginning to understand that reality was far more complex than frontier stories suggested. The search party's approach was conducted with military precision that spoke of extensive experience in potentially hostile territory. Scouts preceded the main group, examining the area for signs of threat or ambush, while the central body maintained formation that would allow rapid response to any emergency. Their discipline and coordination impressed Rebecca with its professionalism, challenging stereotypes about Native American military capabilities. When the lead scout reached a position where he could observe Rebecca's cabin clearly, his reaction was immediate and intense. A series of signals passed between scout and main group, followed by excited discussion that was audible even at a distance. The warrior beside Rebecca provided translation through gestures, indicating that his people had been searching desperately and had feared him dead or captured by enemies. The reunion that followed was both touching and enlightening for Rebecca's understanding of Comanche social relationships. The obvious affection and relief displayed by the search party's members revealed bonds that went far beyond simple military loyalty. These men cared deeply about their missing comrade, and their joy at finding him alive and safe was genuine and moving. But perhaps most significant was their treatment of Rebecca herself. Rather than viewing her with suspicion or hostility, the warriors showed obvious respect and gratitude for her role in their leader's rescue. Their demeanor suggested that they understood exactly what had occurred and appreciated the courage and skill required to extract someone from quicksand successfully. The leader of the search party proved to be a man of obvious authority and intelligence, whose bearing and equipment marked him as someone of high rank within Comanche military hierarchy. His initial conversation with Rebecca's patient was conducted in tones that suggested both personal affection and official concern. Rebecca could not understand their words, but the emotional content was clear enough to interpret without translation. What became evident through observation and the warrior's subsequent explanations was that her patient was not simply a tribal leader, but someone whose importance extended far beyond local or regional significance. The deference shown by the search party's members, combined with their obvious relief at finding him safe, suggested that his loss would have had consequences reaching throughout Comanche society. The search party's leader approached Rebecca with formal dignity, speaking in careful English that revealed education and experience in dealing with white society. His words, when they came, transformed her understanding of everything that had occurred since her morning ride along Willow Creek. "You have saved the life of Swift Eagle, son of Chief Running Bear, heir to leadership of our people," he said with grave formality. "Your courage and kindness will not be forgotten by the Comanche nation." The revelation struck Rebecca with the force of lightning across a clear sky. She had rescued not merely a warrior of high rank, but the crown prince of one of the most powerful tribal confederations on the Great Plains. The implications of this discovery were staggering, extending far beyond her personal circumstances to touch upon regional politics and the delicate balance of power that maintained peace between Native American nations and territorial authorities. Swift Eagle himself seemed pleased by his companion's revelation, though his expression suggested that he had been uncertain about how much to reveal regarding his identity. His manner toward Rebecca remained grateful and respectful, but she now detected additional elements of formality that reflected his awareness of his position and responsibilities. The search party's leader continued his explanation, providing context that helped Rebecca understand the significance of recent events. Swift Eagle had been returning from a diplomatic mission to another tribal confederation when attacked by enemies whose identity remained unclear. The assault had been carefully planned and executed with knowledge that SUGGESTED inside information about his travel route and timing. The implications were disturbing for anyone concerned about regional stability. If hostile forces were specifically targeting Comanche leadership through ambush and assassination, the consequences could include widespread conflict that would affect everyone living in the territory. Swift Eagle's survival was therefore significant not just for his own people, but for all residents of the frontier region. Rebecca found herself thrust into the center of political complexities she had never imagined encountering in her quiet valley. Her simple act of humanitarian rescue had connected her to events and personalities that would influence the future of the entire region. The responsibility was both humbling and intimidating, though she recognized that her actions had been guided by moral principles rather than political calculations. The search party's presence at her homestead created immediate practical challenges as well. 21 mounted warriors, plus their horses, required resources that strained her modest supplies significantly. But Comanche hospitality traditions demanded that guests be treated with generosity regardless of the inconvenience involved, and Rebecca was determined to meet her obligations as host despite the unusual circumstances. Swift Eagle's recovery had progressed remarkably throughout the day, though he was clearly not yet ready for the demanding travel that returning to his people would require. The search party's leader, after consulting with both Swift Eagle and Rebecca, made the decision that the group would remain at her homestead for several days while their prince completed his recovery under her continued care. The arrangement pleased no one entirely, but represented the best compromise available given the various constraints they faced. Rebecca would have the satisfaction of ensuring that her patient received proper medical attention until fully recovered. Swift Eagle would avoid the risks associated with premature travel while enjoying the continued benefits of skilled nursing care. The search party would maintain their protective mission while avoiding the political complications that might arise from bringing a wounded prince back to his people before he was fully healed. As evening approached and the expanded household settled into temporary routines, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary transformation her life had undergone in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she had been a solitary frontier woman concerned primarily with the mundane challenges of ranch management and survival. Tonight, she found herself hostess to Comanche royalty, with responsibilities that extended far beyond her cabin's walls to touch upon the fate of nations. The weight of her new circumstances was balanced by growing appreciation for the character and nobility of the man she had rescued. Swift Eagle's conduct throughout the day had consistently demonstrated qualities of intelligence, courage, and dignity that challenged every stereotype she had absorbed about Native American culture. His obvious concern for her welfare, despite his own precarious situation, revealed depths of character that impressed her deeply. The search party's respectful treatment of her property and their obvious gratitude for her role in their prince's rescue suggested that Comanche society possessed sophisticated concepts of honor and obligation that frontier legends rarely acknowledged. These were clearly people of substance and culture, whose differences from white society were matters of custom rather than fundamental character. As stars emerged in the clear mountain air above her valley, Rebecca found herself contemplating a future that had become infinitely more complex and interesting than anything she had previously imagined. Swift Eagle's presence in her home represented more than temporary hospitality. It was the beginning of relationships and responsibilities that would define the rest of her life. The gentle sounds of evening conversation in the Comanche language drifted through her cabin as warriors shared news and discussed plans for the days ahead. Swift Eagle's voice, when she could distinguish it from the others, carried authority, even in casual conversation, that reminded her constantly of his exalted position within his society. But beneath the formal obligations and political complexities, Rebecca was increasingly aware of personal dimensions to her relationship with Swift Eagle that transcended their respective cultural backgrounds. His gratitude was genuine and deeply felt, but it was accompanied by obvious respect for her competence and character that suggested the foundation for friendship that might endure long after his immediate crisis had passed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions that would test everyone's wisdom and adaptability. But tonight, in the peaceful security of her cabin surrounded by the vast Colorado wilderness, Rebecca allowed herself to feel satisfaction in having acted according to her highest principles when circumstances demanded courage and compassion above personal considerations. The third day of Swift Eagle's recovery dawned with an ominous stillness that seemed to press against the mountains like a held breath. Rebecca woke to find the usual morning sounds absent, no bird songs, no gentle wind through the aspens, even. The horses stood motionless in their corrals, as if sensing some disturbance in the natural order. Her years on the frontier had taught her to read such silences as warnings of approaching trouble. Swift Eagle was already awake when she emerged from her room, standing at the eastern window with an alertness that suggested he too had noticed the unusual quiet. His recovery had been remarkable, the combination of his natural strength and Rebecca's careful nursing having restored much of his vitality. The head wound was healing cleanly, and the exhaustion that had marked his first days was largely gone. But this morning his posture spoke of tension rather than improving health. The search party warriors who had been maintaining respectful distance around her property were now moving with obvious purpose, checking weapons and conferring in low voices that carried undertones of concern. Their leader, who had introduced himself as Stone Wolf, approached the cabin with an expression that immediately communicated serious developments. His English, while careful and formal, conveyed information with devastating clarity. Scouts had reported dust clouds approaching from multiple directions, suggesting coordinated movement by forces whose intentions remained unclear. The patterns of approach indicated military organization rather than the random movement of travelers or traders, and the timing suggested knowledge of Swift Eagle's location that could only come from intelligence sources. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten as the implications became clear. The peaceful interlude of recovery and cultural exchange was ending, replaced by the harsh realities of frontier politics and tribal conflicts. Whatever enemies had originally attacked Swift Eagle had apparently tracked him to her valley, bringing war to her doorstep whether she welcomed it or not. Swift Eagle's reaction to this news revealed depths of character that impressed Rebecca even as it frightened her. His immediate concern was not for his own safety, but for hers and for the warriors who had risked themselves in his rescue. The responsibility of leadership weighed visibly upon him as he contemplated decisions that would affect not just his personal fate, but the lives of everyone who had become involved in his situation. Stone Wolf's tactical assessment painted a grim picture of their defensive options. Rebecca's cabin, while well-positioned for ordinary frontier security, was not designed to withstand assault by organized forces with military equipment. Corrals and outbuildings that served her ranch operations could provide cover for attackers, while the open valley floor offered little advantage to defenders whose numbers were vastly outnumbered by approaching enemies. Most disturbing was Stone Wolf's growing conviction that their attackers possessed detailed intelligence about Swift Eagle's location and condition. The coordination of approach routes and timing suggested planning that went far beyond opportunistic pursuit of a wounded enemy. Someone with access to information about Comanche movements and leadership had provided guidance that enabled this systematic hunt for the prince. Rebecca found herself thrust into military planning discussions that challenged every assumption she had formed about her role in recent events. She had imagined herself as a temporary caretaker providing humanitarian assistance until Swift Eagle could rejoin his people. Now she was being consulted as a strategic ally whose knowledge of local terrain and resources might prove crucial for survival. The revelation that emerged from these tactical discussions transformed Rebecca's understanding of everything that had occurred since her rescue of Swift Eagle from the Quicksand. This was not simply a case of tribal warfare or random violence, but part of a larger conspiracy aimed at eliminating Comanche leadership through systematic assassination and sabotage. Swift Eagle's diplomatic mission, Stone Wolf explained, had been part of efforts to forge alliances between various Plains tribes in response to increasing pressure from territorial authorities seeking to confine all Native Americans to designated reservations. The success of such negotiations could determine whether tribal peoples maintained any degree of independence or faced complete subjugation to federal control. The implications were staggering for anyone concerned about the future of the frontier region. If hostile forces succeeded in eliminating key Comanche leaders, the resulting power vacuum could trigger conflicts that would devastate the entire territory. Peaceful coexistence between Native American nations and white settlers depended upon stable leadership capable of negotiating agreements and maintaining discipline among younger warriors eager for combat. Rebecca's role in preserving Swift Eagle's life had therefore become significant far beyond personal humanitarian concerns. By saving the Comanche prince, she had inadvertently positioned herself as a factor in regional politics whose outcomes would affect thousands of lives. The responsibility was both humbling and terrifying, though she recognized that her actions had been guided by moral principles rather than political calculations. The approaching crisis demanded immediate decisions about defensive strategies and escape routes. Stone Wolf's warriors were skilled and experienced fighters, but their numbers were insufficient to repel a determined assault by larger forces equipped with modern weapons. Swift Eagle's condition, while much improved, was not yet strong enough for the kind of hard travel that escape might require. Swift Eagle himself insisted on participating in all planning discussions despite his recent injuries. His contributions revealed sophisticated understanding of military tactics and strategic thinking that impressed Rebecca with its depth and practicality. This was clearly a natural leader whose education had encompassed far more than the simple warrior skills that frontier legends typically attributed to Native American culture. But perhaps most remarkable was Swift Eagle's evident concern for Rebecca's welfare throughout these deliberations. He repeatedly emphasized the need to ensure her safety, even suggesting that she should flee immediately while escape routes remained open. His willingness to sacrifice his own rescue in order to protect someone who had already risked everything to save his life revealed nobility of character that touched Rebecca deeply. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as Scout reports provided increasingly detailed information about approaching enemies. These were not simple raiding parties or tribal war bands, but organized forces that included white men with military experience directing Native American fighters from various tribal backgrounds. The composition suggested mercenary operations, funded by interests whose motives remained unclear, but whose resources were obviously substantial. Stone Wolf's analysis of enemy capabilities painted a sobering picture of their defensive prospects. The attackers possessed superior numbers, better weapons, and detailed intelligence about their targets. They had chosen their timing and approach routes with professional competence that suggested extensive planning and preparation. Most critically, they seemed determined to eliminate not just Swift Eagle, but anyone who might have aided his escape or recovery. Rebecca's homestead, which had provided peaceful sanctuary for cultural exchange and recovery, was about to become a battlefield where survival would depend upon courage, skill, and luck in proportions that could not be calculated in advance. The comfortable routines of frontier life were giving way to the harsh realities of warfare, where death could arrive with devastating swiftness. The transformation in atmosphere around her cabin was dramatic as warriors prepared for combat with methodical efficiency that spoke of extensive experience in such situations. Weapons were checked and positioned for rapid access. Horses were secured in locations that offered protection while maintaining availability for quick escape and defensive. Positions were established that maximized their limited advantages. Swift Eagle's participation in these preparations revealed the extent of his recovery and the depth of his military training. Despite his recent injuries, he moved with fluid competence as he checked weapons and coordinated with his warriors. His natural authority was evident in every gesture and command, marking him unmistakably as someone born to leadership roles that demanded both physical courage and tactical intelligence. Rebecca found herself assigned specific responsibilities within their defensive plan, her knowledge of local terrain and building layouts making her valuable as both guide and combatant. Stone Wolf had provided her with weapons and basic instruction. In their use, though her frontier experience had already familiarized her with firearms sufficient for personal protection. The waiting period before combat began proved more nerve-wracking than Rebecca had anticipated. Knowing that enemies were approaching with deadly intent created tension that built steadily as minutes passed without visible contact. Every sound seemed magnified, every shadow suggested potential threat. Every moment of continued peace felt like borrowed time that would soon be claimed with interest. Swift Eagle spent these tense hours moving between defensive positions, checking on his warriors and ensuring that everyone understood their roles in the coming fight. But he also made time to speak privately with Rebecca, his concern for her welfare evident despite the larger responsibilities that demanded his attention. Their conversation, conducted in the mixture of English gestures and shared understanding that had developed during his recovery, touched upon subjects that went far beyond immediate tactical concerns. Swift Eagle expressed gratitude that transcended simple appreciation for medical care, acknowledging that Rebecca's courage had preserved not just his life, but the hopes of his people for maintaining their independence and dignity. Rebecca found herself responding with emotions that surprised her with their depth and complexity. What had begun as humanitarian assistance had evolved into something approaching personal devotion, though she was uncertain whether such feelings could survive the cultural boundaries that separated their worlds. Swift Eagle's character and nobility had impressed her profoundly, but the realities of frontier society offered little precedent for relationships that crossed racial lines. The first contact with enemy forces came as arrow fire from concealed positions among the rocks that dotted the valley floor. The projectiles struck with deadly accuracy, forcing defenders to seek cover while revealing the sophistication of their attackers' tactical deployment. These were not wild charges by undisciplined warriors, but carefully coordinated assaults by fighters who understood the principles of military engagement. Stone Wolf's counter tactics demonstrated equal sophistication as he deployed his limited forces to maximum advantage, while conserving ammunition and avoiding unnecessary exposure to enemy fire. The Comanche warriors fought with disciplined courage that challenged every stereotype about Native American military capabilities, their coordination and tactical awareness matching anything Rebecca had observed in territorial militia units. Swift Eagle's role in the defense revealed why he was considered heir to Comanche leadership despite his youth. His tactical decisions were swift and accurate, his personal courage inspiring to warriors who looked to him for guidance, and his concern for minimizing casualties evident in every command he issued. This was clearly someone who understood that leadership meant responsibility for the lives of others, rather than simply personal glory in combat. The siege that developed around Rebecca's homestead proved more complex and prolonged than anyone had anticipated. Enemy forces possessed sufficient numbers to maintain pressure from multiple directions while avoiding decisive engagement that might result in heavy casualties. Their apparent strategy involved wearing down the defenders through attrition while preventing any possibility of escape or reinforcement. Rebecca's cabin became the focal point of a battle that represented far more than simple combat between opposing forces. This was a clash between different visions of the frontier's future, between those who sought accommodation and mutual respect, and those who believed that only total domination could ensure lasting peace. The outcome would influence not just the immediate participants, but the entire region's political development. As the first day of siege wore on, Rebecca gained new appreciation for the sophisticated military culture that characterized Plains Indian society. The Comanche warriors demonstrated tactical flexibility, personal courage, and group discipline that rivaled any professional military unit she had observed. Their loyalty to Swift Eagle was absolute, but it was based upon earned respect rather than blind obedience to inherited authority. The evening brought temporary cessation of active combat, but no relief from tension as both sides settled into defensive positions for what promised to be an extended confrontation. Enemy forces had established a perimeter that prevented escape while maintaining safe distances from return fire, creating a stalemate that favored whoever possessed greater resources and patience. Swift Eagle used this interlude to reveal information about his mission and its significance that transformed Rebecca's understanding of recent events. His diplomatic efforts had been aimed at creating a confederation of Plains tribes, capable of negotiating from strength with territorial authorities who seemed determined to eliminate Native American independence entirely. The stakes involved were enormous for everyone living in the frontier region. Successful negotiations might preserve peace, while allowing continued cultural diversity and mutual respect between different peoples. Failure could trigger conflicts that would devastate the territory for years to come, destroying the lives and dreams of settlers and Native Americans alike. Rebecca's inadvertent involvement in these larger events had positioned her as a witness to history in the making. Her rescue of Swift Eagle had preserved not just individual life, but the possibility of peaceful resolution to conflicts that threatened to consume everything she had built in this remote valley. The responsibility was overwhelming, but she recognized that moral principles had guided her actions rather than political calculations. As night settled over the besieged homestead, Rebecca found herself contemplating a future that had become impossible to predict. The comfortable routines of frontier life had been replaced by uncertainty that extended far beyond personal survival to encompass the fate of cultures and communities across the entire region. Swift Eagle's presence beside her defensive position provided comfort that transcended their cultural differences and the desperate nature of their circumstances. His quiet strength and obvious concern for her welfare created bonds that challenged every assumption she had formed about the possibilities for understanding between their peoples. The stars that emerged in the clear mountain air seemed to shine with unusual intensity, as if the universe itself was acknowledging the significance of events unfolding in this remote Colorado valley. Tomorrow would bring renewed combat and decisions that would determine not just their personal survival, but the future direction of an entire region's development. The siege had transformed Rebecca's homestead into a symbol of resistance against forces that sought to eliminate hope for peaceful coexistence between different cultures. Whether that symbol would survive the coming tests remained to be seen, but the courage and determination of its defenders had already demonstrated that some values were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. Against success, the second dawn of the siege arrived shrouded in mist that rolled down from the mountain peaks like ghostly fingers probing the valley floor. Rebecca had spent the night alternating between fitful sleep and vigilant watch, her body exhausted, but her mind racing with thoughts of survival and the extraordinary circumstances that had transformed her quiet homestead into a battlefield. The fog provided both concealment and uncertainty, hiding enemy movements while creating an atmosphere of otherworldly tension. Swift Eagle had recovered strength with remarkable speed, his natural vitality combining with Rebecca's skilled care to restore much of his formidable physical presence. Throughout the night, she had observed him moving between defensive positions with fluid grace that spoke of complete familiarity with combat situations. His wound still required careful attention, but it no longer limited his effectiveness as both warrior and leader of their small band of defenders. Stonewolf's tactical assessment of their situation had grown increasingly grim as enemy forces demonstrated both patience and sophisticated planning. The attackers had established supply lines that suggested they were prepared for an extended siege, while their positioning indicated detailed knowledge of local terrain that could only have come from extensive reconnaissance or insider information. Most troubling was evidence that their enemies possessed resources far beyond what any single tribal faction could command. The morning brought renewed, probing attacks that tested different sections of their defensive perimeter with methodical precision. These were not wild charges driven by passion or revenge, but calculated efforts to identify weaknesses that could be exploited in a decisive assault. Enemy commanders clearly understood that time favored their superior numbers, while the defenders faced dwindling supplies and growing exhaustion. Rebecca found herself adapting to combat conditions with competence that surprised even her own assessment of her capabilities. Frontier life had taught her to handle firearms effectively, but the sustained pressure of siege warfare demanded skills she had never imagined needing. Swift Eagle's quiet instructions in defensive tactics proved invaluable, his teaching combining practical expertise with sensitivity to her inexperience in organized combat. The cultural exchange that had characterized their earlier interactions continued even amid the desperate circumstances of their defense. Swift Eagle's explanations of Comanche military philosophy revealed sophisticated concepts of honor, courage, and tactical thinking that challenged every assumption Rebecca had absorbed about Native American approaches to warfare. These were people whose strategic understanding rivaled any she had encountered among territorial military authorities. But perhaps most remarkable was the deepening personal connection that had developed between Rebecca and Swift Eagle, despite the chaos surrounding them. Their shared experiences of danger and mutual dependence had created bonds that transcended the cultural boundaries separating their worlds. She found herself thinking of him not as an exotic representative of alien culture, but as an individual whose character and nobility had earned her respect and growing affection. Swift Eagle's behavior toward her had evolved as well, moving beyond formal gratitude for life-saving assistance to something approaching genuine partnership in their struggle for survival. He consulted her opinions on tactical matters, relied upon her knowledge of local conditions, and demonstrated concern for her welfare that went far beyond political necessity or social obligation. Their relationship was becoming something unprecedented in her frontier experience. The afternoon brought developments that transformed their understanding of the forces arrayed against them. A lone rider approached under a flag of truce, his appearance and bearing immediately identifying him as someone of authority within the enemy hierarchy. Stonewolf's careful scrutiny revealed details that provided disturbing insights into the nature of their opposition. The emissary proved to be a white man whose clothing and equipment suggested military background, though his current allegiances clearly lay with forces hostile to both Comanche interests and territorial stability. His facility with Native American languages indicated extensive experience in frontier politics, while his confident demeanor suggested backing by resources sufficient to sustain prolonged conflict. His message, delivered in fluent English for Rebecca's benefit and translated for the Comanche warriors, revealed the true scope of the conspiracy they faced. This was not simply an attempt to eliminate Swift Eagle as an individual, but part of a systematic campaign to destabilize Plains Indian leadership and provoke conflicts that would justify massive military intervention by federal authorities. The offer presented by the emissary was as revealing as it was unacceptable. Swift Eagle would be allowed to depart unharmed if he agreed to abandon his diplomatic mission and withdraw from all political activities that might unite tribal confederations in opposition to reservation policies. Rebecca would be permitted to return to her normal life with guarantees against future interference, provided she maintained silence about recent events. The alternative, delivered with cold precision that left no doubt about its sincerity, was total destruction of everyone currently defending the homestead, followed by systematic elimination of Swift Eagle's family and supporters throughout Comanche territory. The stakes had escalated far beyond personal survival to encompass the future of an entire people's struggle for independence and dignity. Swift Eagle's response to these ultimatums revealed depths of character that impressed Rebecca profoundly. Without hesitation or apparent consideration of personal consequences, he rejected demands that would have saved his life at the cost of his people's hopes for freedom. His commitment to principles of leadership and responsibility was absolute, regardless of the personal price such dedication might require. Rebecca's own decision came with equal clarity, though it surprised her with its intensity and conviction. She had become part of this struggle through accident and humanitarian impulse, but she would remain by choice and moral commitment. The forces threatening Swift Eagle represented everything she opposed about frontier development based upon domination rather than cooperation between different peoples. The emissary's departure marked the end of any possibility for peaceful resolution to their crisis. Enemy forces had revealed their true intentions and demonstrated the ruthlessness with which they would pursue their objectives. The siege would continue until one side achieved complete victory, with no quarter asked or given by either combatant group. Preparations for the final assault intensified throughout the remainder of the day as both attackers and defenders made ready for decisive combat. Enemy forces had grown substantially with the arrival of reinforcements, while Stone Wolf's warriors maintained their positions, despite growing fatigue and ammunition shortages that would soon become critical factors in their ability to continue resistance. Swift Eagle used these hours to share information about Comanche culture and values that provided Rebecca with deeper understanding of the people she had chosen to defend. His descriptions of tribal governance, spiritual beliefs, and social organization revealed sophisticated systems that bore little resemblance to frontier stereotypes about savage primitiveness. These were people with complex institutions and refined concepts of justice, honor, and community responsibility. But beyond cultural education, Swift Eagle's conversations with Rebecca touched upon personal subjects that acknowledged the extraordinary nature of their developing relationship. The barriers that normally separated their worlds had been swept away by shared danger and mutual respect, creating possibilities for understanding that neither had previously imagined achievable. Rebecca found herself contemplating a future that would require choices she had never expected to face. Swift Eagle's obvious affection for her was matched by her own growing attachment to someone whose character had proven itself under the most demanding circumstances possible. But the realities of frontier society offered little precedent for relationships that crossed cultural boundaries so dramatically. The final enemy assault began at sunset, with coordinated attacks from 3 directions that tested every aspect of their defensive preparations. The fighting was intense and desperate, with both sides understanding that this engagement would determine not just immediate survival, but the future direction of regional politics and cultural development. Stone Wolf's tactical leadership proved exceptional, as he directed their limited forces to maximum effectiveness, while conserving ammunition and minimizing casualties among defenders whose lives could not be replaced. The Comanche warriors fought with disciplined courage that honored their military traditions while adapting to defensive circumstances that favored systematic resistance over aggressive counterattack. Swift Eagle's participation in combat revealed why he was considered worthy of eventual leadership despite his youth. His personal courage inspired others, while his tactical decisions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of military principles, adapted to their specific situation. Most importantly, his concern for minimizing casualties among his followers showed leadership qualities that prioritized responsibility over personal glory. Rebecca's contribution to their defense exceeded anything she had imagined possible when the crisis began. Her marksmanship proved effective at crucial moments. Her knowledge of local terrain enabled tactical advantages that surprised attacking forces, and her calm competence under pressure provided stability that helped maintain group morale during the most desperate phases of combat. The turning point came when enemy forces attempted to storm the main cabin in overwhelming numbers, believing that concentrated assault would succeed where systematic pressure had failed. The attack was repelled through combined efforts that showcased the effectiveness of their defensive cooperation, but the cost in ammunition and energy left them vulnerable to renewed assault. Swift Eagle's decision during this critical moment revealed both his tactical brilliance and his willingness to sacrifice himself for others' survival. He proposed leading a mounted charge that would break through enemy lines and draw pursuit away from the homestead, giving Rebecca and the remaining warriors opportunity to escape while he faced certain death in hopeless combat against superior numbers. Rebecca's response to this proposal surprised everyone, including herself, with its emotional intensity and practical wisdom. She refused to accept any plan that involved Swift Eagle's sacrifice, insisting that their survival must be achieved together or not at all. Her passionate argument revealed depths of feeling that had developed beyond simple friendship to something approaching love that transcended cultural boundaries. The alternative strategy that emerged from their desperate consultation proved both daring and practical. Rather than attempting to hold fixed positions until overwhelmed by superior forces, they would abandon the homestead entirely and attempt escape under cover of darkness, using their knowledge of local terrain to evade pursuit while seeking sanctuary in mountain wilderness areas. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution, with no margin for error or hesitation. Each person would carry only essential supplies, while their horses would be loaded with materials necessary for extended survival in harsh conditions. Most critically, they would need to travel as a coordinated unit, despite varying levels of riding skill and physical condition among the group. Swift Eagle's preparation for this desperate gamble included private moments with Rebecca that acknowledged the extraordinary nature of their relationship and the uncertain future they would face together. His expressions of gratitude had evolved into something deeper and more personal, while his concern for her welfare reflected emotions that challenged every assumption about the possibilities for understanding between their peoples. Rebecca's own feelings had grown beyond simple admiration for Swift Eagle's character to genuine affection that surprised her with its depth and intensity. The shared experiences of danger and mutual dependence had created bonds that felt more substantial and meaningful than any relationship she had previously known. But the practical challenges of building a life together remained daunting given the cultural differences that separated their worlds. The escape itself proved both more dangerous and more successful than anyone had dared hope. Enemy forces had concentrated their attention on the homestead buildings, assuming that defenders would attempt to hold their fortified positions rather than risk flight across open terrain. The oversight provided crucial minutes of undetected movement that enabled their group to reach the mountain foothills before pursuit could be organized effectively. Swift Eagle's leadership during their flight demonstrated mastery of wilderness travel that impressed Rebecca with its sophistication and effectiveness. His knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and survival techniques enabled progress that maintained distance from pursuing forces while preserving the strength necessary for extended travel in challenging conditions. The days that followed their escape tested everyone's endurance and determination as they traveled deeper into mountain wilderness that offered sanctuary at the cost of extreme hardship. Food became scarce, weather conditions deteriorated, and the constant threat of discovery by pursuing enemies created psychological pressure that challenged even the strongest personalities. But these trials also provided opportunities for cultural exchange and personal connection that might never have occurred under normal circumstances. Rebecca learned Comanche words and customs while sharing knowledge of frontier survival techniques that proved valuable in their mountain environment. Swift Eagle's patient teaching revealed depths of wisdom and understanding that challenged every stereotype she had absorbed about Native American culture. Most significantly, their relationship continued to deepen despite the harsh conditions that surrounded them. Shared hardships had stripped away the social conventions that normally governed interactions between people from different cultural backgrounds, creating opportunities for genuine understanding based upon character and mutual respect rather than superficial categories of race or origin. The revelation of feelings that had developed between Rebecca and Swift Eagle came naturally during their mountain refuge, acknowledged without drama or extensive discussion as something that had grown from their shared experiences of danger and mutual support. Neither attempted to analyze the practical implications of such attachment, focusing instead upon the immediate reality of emotions that transcended the boundaries normally separating their worlds. Swift Eagle's vision of their possible future together included possibilities that Rebecca had never imagined as achievable. His status within Comanche society could provide protection and acceptance for relationships that challenged conventional expectations, while her frontier skills and character would be valued regardless of her cultural origins. The path would not be easy, but it was conceivable for people whose commitment to each other had been tested under the most demanding circumstances possible. As their mountain sanctuary provided respite from immediate dangers, both began to contemplate the longer-term implications of their extraordinary relationship and the events that had brought them together. The siege of her homestead had ended in apparent defeat, but it had also preserved Swift Eagle's life and mission while creating bonds between them that promised to influence their futures in ways neither could fully anticipate. 7 days had passed since Rebecca and Swift Eagle began their refuge in the hidden canyon that Stone Wolf had guided them to after their escape from the burning homestead. The sanctuary lay concealed among towering rock formations that created natural barriers against discovery, while a crystal-clear spring provided water and the surrounding meadows offered grazing for their horses. Ancient pictographs on the canyon wall suggested this place had served as refuge for generations of people, seeking safety from conflicts that raged across the plains below. Rebecca had used these days of relative peace to tend Swift Eagle's remaining injuries while learning more about Comanche culture than she had ever imagined possible. His patient teaching had revealed sophisticated concepts of governance, spirituality, and social organization that challenged every assumption her frontier upbringing had instilled about Native American civilization. These were people with complex institutions, refined artistic traditions, and philosophical understanding that rivaled any society she had encountered. But beyond cultural education, their time together had allowed the development of personal intimacy that transcended the dramatic circumstances of their initial meeting. Swift Eagle's character had proven itself through trials that revealed nobility, courage, and gentleness in proportions that impressed Rebecca deeply. His concern for her welfare had evolved beyond gratitude or political necessity to genuine affection that acknowledged her as an equal partner in their shared struggles. Rebecca's own feelings had grown with equal intensity, though she remained uncertain about the practical possibilities for building a life that bridged such different worlds. Swift Eagle's assurances about acceptance within Comanche society were encouraging, but she understood that their relationship would face challenges that extended far beyond personal preferences to encompass political considerations and cultural expectations neither could fully control. The morning of the 7th day dawned with unusual atmospheric conditions that created an otherworldly quality of light throughout their hidden canyon. Mist rose from the spring in spirals that caught and reflected sunlight like columns of golden silk, while the silence held a quality of expectation that seemed to press against the surrounding stone walls. Rebecca had learned to interpret such signs as meaningful rather than coincidental, and this morning felt charged with significance that made her increasingly alert to possibilities. Swift Eagle's behavior throughout the early hours reflected similar awareness of approaching change. He spent considerable time studying the canyon's rim for signs of movement, though his manner suggested anticipation rather than fear of discovery. When Rebecca questioned him about his obvious concern, his response revealed information that transformed her understanding of their situation entirely. During their mountain refuge, Swift Eagle had been using smoke signals and other communication methods to maintain contact with his people, providing information about his survival and location while coordinating plans for eventual reunion. The system was sophisticated enough to convey complex messages across vast distances, enabling the kind of long-range coordination that Plains Indian society required for both military and diplomatic activities. His father, Chief Running Bear, had received word of his son's rescue and survival, along with detailed accounts of Rebecca's courage and the political conspiracy that had necessitated their flight from her homestead. The response had been immediate and decisive, involving mobilization of resources that reflected both parental concern and recognition of the strategic importance of Swift Eagle's diplomatic mission for tribal survival. Rebecca's role in preserving the prince's life had elevated her status within Comanche society to levels that challenged traditional categories for understanding relationships between Native Americans and white settlers. Her courage, skill, and character had earned respect that transcended racial boundaries, while her obvious affection for Swift Eagle created personal dimensions that required careful consideration by tribal leadership. The sound that announced their rescue came as a rhythmic thunder that rolled across the landscape like an approaching storm, growing in intensity until it filled the canyon with reverberations that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Rebecca recognized the cadence as hoofbeats, but the scale suggested numbers that exceeded anything she had previously encountered. This was not a simple rescue party, but a ceremonial procession that spoke of momentous significance. Swift Eagle's excitement was evident as he prepared to greet his approaching kinsman, though his attention remained focused on Rebecca's comfort and preparation for what promised to be an overwhelming encounter with Comanche royalty. His explanations of protocol and expectations helped her understand the formal elements of what was about to occur, while his obvious pride in presenting her to his people revealed depths of feeling that touched her profoundly. The first riders to appear at the canyon's rim were scouts whose magnificent horses and elaborate equipment immediately identified them as members of Chief Running Bear's personal guard. Their discipline and precision spoke of elite military units whose training and loyalty were absolute, while their obvious reverence for Swift Eagle confirmed his exalted status within tribal hierarchy. But these advance riders were merely the introduction to a spectacle that defied every expectation Rebecca had formed about Plains Indian society. The main procession that followed included hundreds of mounted warriors, whose coordinated movement created a river of color and motion that flowed down into the canyon like a living tapestry woven from the finest materials imaginable. At the center of this magnificent assembly rode Chief Running Bear himself, a figure whose presence commanded immediate attention and respect from everyone within sight. Rebecca had expected to meet a tribal leader of obvious authority, but the reality exceeded her most ambitious imaginings. This was clearly a man born to rule, whose natural dignity and commanding presence would have marked him as nobility in any society. His appearance reflected wealth and status that challenged frontier assumptions about Native American material culture. The ceremonial regalia he wore incorporated precious metals, rare stones, and artistic craftsmanship that spoke of sophisticated trade networks and cultural refinement extending far beyond simple subsistence activities. His horse, a magnificent stallion that rivaled Swift Eagle's mount for beauty and training, carried equipment that represented the finest achievements of Plains Indian metalwork and leather crafting. But perhaps most impressive was the obvious intelligence and character that marked Chief Running Bear's features and bearing. This was clearly a leader whose authority derived from personal qualities rather than inherited position alone, someone whose decisions shaped the lives of thousands, while maintaining the kind of moral integrity that inspired absolute loyalty from his followers. The reunion between father and son was conducted with formal dignity that acknowledged their public roles while revealing deep personal affection that transcended political considerations. Chief Running Bear's relief at finding Swift Eagle alive and well was evident despite his controlled demeanor, while his obvious pride in his son's conduct during recent trials spoke of paternal love that had been tested by fears of loss. Swift Eagle's presentation of Rebecca to his father was managed with ceremonial precision that honored both her courage and her growing importance within their family structure. His formal recounting of her rescue efforts, medical care, and loyalty during their subsequent trials elevated her status from temporary ally to honored member of their extended kinship network. Chief Running Bear's response to meeting Rebecca revealed the sophisticated diplomatic skills that had enabled his leadership of one of the most powerful tribal confederations on the Great Plains. His manner combined formal courtesy with genuine warmth, acknowledging her extraordinary contributions while assessing her character and suitability for the role she was apparently destined to play within Comanche society. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Rebecca had witnessed during her years on the frontier. Chief Running Bear had brought not just warriors and supplies for Swift Eagle's rescue, but the sacred objects and ritual elements necessary for conducting formal adoption ceremonies that would transform Rebecca's status from honored guest to permanent member of their tribal family. The presentation of gifts began with items that acknowledged her specific contributions to Swift Eagle's survival. Weapons of exceptional quality recognized her courage in combat, while medical supplies and healing tools honored her skills as a caretaker. Clothing and jewelry of magnificent craftsmanship welcomed her into the social networks that bound Comanche women together in mutual support and shared responsibility. But the most significant offerings were those that acknowledged her developing relationship with Swift Eagle and her potential role as his partner in both personal and political endeavors. Chief Running Bear's presentation of a ceremonial crown, crafted from precious metals and decorated with symbols of authority, formally recognized her status as someone worthy of marriage to tribal royalty. The horses that accompanied these ceremonies were perhaps the most impressive element of Chief Running Bear's demonstration of respect and acceptance. 200 sacred Mustangs, each representing bloodlines that had been preserved for generations as symbols of Comanche cultural identity, were presented as dowry gifts that would ensure Rebecca's security and status regardless of future political developments. These animals were not simply valuable livestock, but living representatives of spiritual and cultural traditions that connected present-day Comanche society to ancestral wisdom and natural relationships that had sustained Plains Indian civilization for countless generations. Their presentation to Rebecca constituted formal recognition of her worthiness to preserve and transmit these sacred traditions to future generations. The implications of such recognition were staggering for someone whose frontier upbringing had provided no preparation for roles involving spiritual and cultural responsibilities of such magnitude. Rebecca found herself elevated from isolated frontier woman to guardian of traditions that embodied the deepest values and aspirations of an entire people. Swift Eagle's obvious pride in his father's generosity was matched by his careful attention to Rebecca's comfort during ceremonies that challenged her understanding of appropriate responses to unprecedented honor. His translations and explanations helped her navigate protocols that were entirely foreign to her experience, while his support enabled her to participate with dignity in rituals that would transform her life irrevocably. The formal adoption ceremony itself was conducted with solemnity that acknowledged its permanent significance for all participants. Ancient words and gestures that had been preserved across generations created bonds that transcended individual choice to encompass spiritual relationships, connecting Rebecca to the entire network of kinship obligations and privileges that defined Comanche social structure. Chief Running Bear's personal blessing of Rebecca's union with Swift Eagle carried authority that eliminated any possibility of future challenges to their relationship within tribal society. His formal recognition of their bond created precedent for cross-cultural marriages that might influence frontier development for decades to come, while his obvious approval of Rebecca's character provided foundation for her acceptance within even the most traditional elements of Comanche society. The celebration that followed extended throughout the remainder of the day and into the evening hours, featuring demonstrations of horsemanship, traditional dances, and storytelling that showcased the richness of Plains Indian cultural achievement. Rebecca found herself not merely observing these activities, but participating as an honored member of the community whose presence was welcomed and valued. The feast prepared for the occasion included delicacies that revealed the sophistication of Comanche cuisine when resources and time permitted elaborate preparation. Game meats were prepared with spices and techniques that created flavors Rebecca had never experienced, while traditional breads and vegetable dishes demonstrated agricultural knowledge that challenged assumptions about nomadic peoples' relationship with plant cultivation. But perhaps most meaningful were the personal conversations that occurred throughout the celebration as individual tribal members approached to express their gratitude for her role in preserving Swift Eagle's life and their hopes for her happiness within their community. These interactions revealed the depth of affection and respect that Swift Eagle commanded among his people, while demonstrating the generous spirit that characterized Comanche social relationships at their finest. Chief Running Bear's private conversation with Rebecca during the evening hours provided insights into the political and cultural context that would shape her future role within tribal society. His explanations of the challenges facing Plains Indian civilization helped her understand the significance of Swift Eagle's diplomatic mission and the ways in which their relationship might contribute to broader efforts at cultural preservation and adaptation. The chief's assessment of Rebecca's character and capabilities was both flattering and demanding, acknowledging her proven courage and intelligence, while outlining expectations for her participation in tribal governance and cultural transmission that would require continued learning and growth throughout her lifetime. This was not simply a romantic union, but a political alliance with implications for both individual happiness and collective survival. Swift Eagle's participation in these discussions revealed his own evolution from rescued victim to active leader, whose experiences had deepened his understanding of both the challenges and opportunities facing his people. His obvious love for Rebecca was balanced by realistic appreciation of the responsibilities they would share as representatives of successful cross-cultural cooperation. The practical arrangements for their future life together included establishment of a household that would honor both Comanche traditions and Rebecca's frontier skills, creating synthesis of cultural elements that might serve as model for other families attempting to bridge different worlds. Their children would be raised with knowledge of both heritages, prepared to serve as cultural ambassadors in whatever circumstances the future might present. The return journey to the main Comanche encampment was conducted as a triumphal procession that demonstrated Chief Running Bear's pride in his son's achievements and his satisfaction with the alliance that had emerged from crisis and danger. Rebecca rode beside Swift Eagle on one of the sacred horses that had been presented to her, her new ceremonial clothing marking her transformation from frontier settler to Comanche princess. The reception that awaited them at the tribal capital exceeded even the magnificent ceremony that had marked her adoption. Thousands of people had gathered to celebrate Swift Eagle's safe return and to welcome the woman whose courage had preserved their future leader's life. The demonstrations of gratitude and acceptance created emotional experiences that touched Rebecca more deeply than any honor she had previously received. The establishment of their new household was accomplished with efficiency that reflected both tribal resources and the community's eagerness to ensure their comfort and happiness. The dwelling prepared for them incorporated the finest achievements of Comanche architecture and decoration, while the servants and advisors assigned to their service represented the most skilled and loyal members of tribal society. But beyond material comfort, Rebecca found herself welcomed into social networks and cultural traditions that provided intellectual and spiritual stimulation she had never expected to encounter in any society. The women's councils that governed many aspects of tribal life offered opportunities for meaningful participation in community decision-making, while the artistic and cultural activities that flourished during peaceful periods engaged her creativity and curiosity in entirely new directions. Swift Eagle's role within tribal governance expanded significantly following his successful completion of the diplomatic mission that had originally led to their meeting. His experiences had enhanced his reputation for wisdom and courage, while his marriage to Rebecca created precedent for cultural accommodation that strengthened his position as advocate for adaptive strategies that might ensure tribal survival in changing times. Their partnership proved effective both personally and politically, as they worked together to address challenges that required both traditional wisdom and innovative approaches to unfamiliar problems. Rebecca's frontier experience provided valuable perspectives on relationships with white society, while Swift Eagle's cultural knowledge enabled navigation of tribal politics and customs that might otherwise have excluded her from meaningful participation. The sacred Mustangs that had been presented as dowry gifts became the foundation for a horse breeding program that combined Comanche bloodlines with animals Rebecca had acquired during her frontier years. The resulting offspring represented synthesis of different breeding traditions that created horses of exceptional quality and versatility, suitable for both traditional Plains Indian activities and the changing demands of frontier life. The children that eventually blessed their union embodied the cultural synthesis that their marriage represented, inheriting physical characteristics and intellectual capabilities from both parents, while being raised with knowledge and appreciation of dual heritage that prepared them for leadership roles in whatever future circumstances might develop. Years later, when peace treaties and cultural accommodation had replaced the conflicts that had originally brought Rebecca and Swift Eagle together, their story became legend among both Native American and white communities as an example of the possibilities for understanding and cooperation that could emerge from courage, compassion, and mutual respect. The canyon where Chief Running Bear had conducted Rebecca's adoption ceremony was designated as a sacred site, where future generations could come to remember that love and honor could transcend the boundaries that seemed to separate different peoples. The pictographs that had marked previous generations' use of the sanctuary were joined by new symbols, recording the story of the white woman who had saved a Comanche prince and been rewarded with a crown and sacred horses. Rebecca's transformation from solitary frontier woman to Comanche princess represented more than personal achievement. It demonstrated the possibility for cultural bridges that could preserve the best elements of different traditions while creating new forms of civilization adapted to the changing conditions of the American frontier. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.